Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist. I am a real life therapist who has turned pop culture enthusiast, and today's episode is going to be about me. um, after I just did so many episodes about ego and all of that, I'm just kidding. It is going to be about me, but what I'm going to share with you today is I have had some very, very traumatic experiences, but from those experiences have come some of the most amazing experiences of my life. And specifically, some of you are aware, those who have been following me for a while on Instagram, that I am a two-time cancer survivor. So my first cancer, I was 17 years old, and I was sick for a long time. I'll tell the story, but through that cancer, because I was 17 years old, I got to make a wish through the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and I met the cast of Friends. And this was in 1999. So, oh my gosh, by the way, my niece, she's 17. She's the most beautiful, wonderful human being. But when I told her the story, she said, "Oh, the 1900s." I'm like, "Oh, give me a break." So, yes, in the 1900s, when Friends were of their peak popularity, I was able to make a wish and I met them. And through that, I also got to visit LA. I got to meet the cast of ER and West Wing. And it just, is the most amazing story. So I'm going to share a little bit about my cancer history for those of you who are dealing with certain situations. In addition to being an ally and an advocate in all ways to marginalized communities, people with cancer and survivorship, I'm also a huge ally and advocate for them as well. I'll share some maybe health advocacy tips and discuss a little bit about how to move forward despite some really challenging traumatic circumstances. Part of this podcast is me wanting to share my experience, strength, and hope with you all, because I believe that, surviving cancer and, my other health issues, I believe that I need to use things that have happened to me for good. That's just my morals and values. And so that's what we're going to do today. So what I'm going to start out by sharing is that when I was 17, as I mentioned, I was actually born and raised in a suburb of Chicago, Illinois called Downers Grove. So shout out to anyone in the Downers Grove greater area that's listening to this. I lived there from birth until I was 17 years old. And then my dad got a job transfer, and we moved to Sugarloaf, Pennsylvania, which is as small as it sounds, when in the middle of my high school career. Okay. So I did my freshman, sophomore year in Downers Grove, at Downers Grove South. Shout out Mustangs. And then I did my junior, senior year in Hazleton area high school. The culture shock was wild because, I grew up among a lot of, diversity and culture, and did not really get to experience that a lot when we moved to Pennsylvania. And, switching schools like that in the middle of your high school career was torture. It was so awful. In junior year, you have your friends, you don't want to make new friends. It's like a whole thing. And the area that I live in now, it's a little bit cliquey. So, I was definitely an outsider, and I thought that was hard. And then as soon as we moved, I started feeling sick. I started, developing a lot of symptoms, and, it turned out, to be ovarian cancer. So what I want to do is share some of the symptoms just to, for those of you listening, I think women, we need to be specifically women, we have to be our own best advocates for our reproductive health, because what I have experienced in the last 22 years since this time, I'm 42 now, I have had the most horrible mistreatment from OBGYNs or gynecology oncology, both male and female. I've had some of the most horrific, invalidating, inappropriate experiences. And unfortunately, women's health there's a huge gap in terms of education and, humanity. And, so the point is that by the time I was diagnosed, my symptoms were so bad. I had been sick for so long and nobody listened to me, that by the time it was diagnosed, there were doctors that wouldn't even agree to treat me. My parents took me to Hershey Medical Center and they recommended hospice. And so thankfully, my parents were like, I don't think so. They took me to Penn Medicine, which is in Philadelphia, and Penn Medicine saved my life. They also believed that, by the time my cancer was discovered, it was ovarian cancer. There's 4 stages: 1, 2, 3, and 4. And within those 4 stages, there's A, B, C, and D. I was stage 3, C, and D when I was diagnosed, and 4 is terminal. And so it was the reason I'm sharing this is that I knew for a long time that something wasn't right. But because I was 17, my mom would take me to doctors and they'd say, well, she's stressed. You guys just had a big move and she's a teenager, so she's probably not eating correctly. And I was advocating for myself, but nobody listened. So unfortunately, things got worse and worse. And one day my belly button, which is an innie, it started to poke out. And at the time, growing up, I was naturally thin, but at this time I weighed about 80 pounds and I looked like I was dying. So what happened? The tumor got so large that it was pressing on my belly button. And that is how I was eventually diagnosed. And that's why it was so late. And keep in mind, this was in 1998. There has been amazing medical technology since then, and especially with cancer. But this was at a time where this was a death sentence. And so my parents, because of, the severity of it, they had contacted the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And the Make-A-Wish Foundation, granted, they were like, yes, you get a wish. It was, the wildest experience of my life, and getting to pick what I got to do was so insane. I had so many different ideas. Of course, as a teenager, I thought, well, I should go on a shopping spree. And thank God someone talked me out of that, because they're like, who cares about clothes? You can shop anytime. And at the time, Friends, as I mentioned, was really, really huge. And I was undergoing chemotherapy. I had tons of surgeries, port implantation, surgery after surgery. It was just a year of just a lot of really hard stuff. Again, being 17 years old, not knowing what to do with it. I was new in high school. It was just kind of, really challenging. So watching Friends kind of helped get me through, the tough spots and, the sickness and all of that. And so that's what I ended up picking. Before I move on to that cool experience, I just want to note, so with ovarian cancer and cervical cancers, women, your bodies, period, point blank. Doctors are the expert of their field. They're not an expert of you. So if something isn't right and someone is not listening to you, you fire them and move to the next. I've fired many a doctor at this point in my life, dozens, in fact, which I'm also happy to tell you about. If you feel you are not being heard, or something is happening in your body and people are telling you it's nothing, do not sleep on your intuition. You know you better than anyone knows you. That is my PSA. And eventually, there are some amazing doctors out there. Unfortunately, it's like you gotta kiss a few frogs before you get to your prince, so to speak. But that's kind of, I just really want to put that out there. And the second thing I want to put out there is please be aware of the signs with cervical and ovarian cancers, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, your whole GI system and your whole abdomen, are impacted and having symptoms. So if you are experiencing a symptom right now, please get it checked out, because I promise you, knowing is better than not knowing, and being able to be proactive and saving your own life is pretty cool. Take it from me. I've done it twice. The second cancer is one that I'm dealing with now currently. So when I was 35, I was diagnosed with a secondary cancer called chronic lymphocytic leukemia and lymphoma. Lucky for me, this cancer is a real stage 4 clinger, but it's kind of my dark humor. I have developed a very dark sense of humor through this whole thing, and that keeps me going. So I'm sorry if that offends you, but for me, it's, it helps. So a chronic cancer is essentially one of those that's kind of with you for life. For me, so the first cancer I did chemotherapy, surgeries, and the like. This cancer is more slow growing, but I had a kind of a more aggressive form of it. And currently, I'm undergoing immunotherapy treatment, which I've been doing since the pandemic. Going through my second cancer diagnosis and treatment during a pandemic was the most horrifically scary thing of my life, and created a lot of trauma and a lot of, mental health issues and things like that. Again, the reason I'm discussing this and bringing it all up is I want people listening to this and watching it, by the way. For those of you who are listening to this, there's also a video on YouTube. I'm going to show some old pictures and things like that. I will also post these on my Instagram page. So don't worry if you can't see the video, you're not missing anything. But please go to YouTube, your Bish Therapist channel, and subscribe. So my CLL, during the pandemic, it was really hard. My doctor said, we don't understand anything about this virus. It will probably kill you. So stay in the house. My husband was terrified. I was terrified. Masks somehow were political, which don't even get me started on that. But I had already lived through a near-death experience, and now here I am going through another cancer during a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. I mean, it was just horrible. It was horrifying. It kind of put me into a really significant depression, which I talked about on my Instagram page. I developed, a complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I developed depression, and my depression became so severe that for the first time in my life, I couldn't see a way out. I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I thought that this was just the way that my life was going to be, alone and isolated and sick in a house. And to be clear, I did the most difficult trauma work of my life during the pandemic, because I knew that this was either going to kill me or I needed to get out of this and make sure I could never go back specifically to the place that I was in. So I found an amazing therapist. I've had therapy on and off for a long time, but finding your true fit in therapy can sometimes be a challenge. All therapists have different personalities, and if you're in therapy right now, great. And if you feel there's a little bit of an issue, well, I think that's something that should be addressed and talked about. I think ultimately getting to somebody who feels like a good fit for us is really important, because we're not going to feel safe to do the work if we don't fully trust the person. So I found a really great therapist who we both just dug in, and I did the hardest work of my life for 2 years. I thought, this is never going to get better. It was just the hardest time of my life. And then one day I just walked outside and I saw rainbows and butterflies. And, it sounds very cliche, but the storm had passed. And I come out now on the other side of it, feeling, healing is linear. It's a process. It kind of goes, up, down, all around. But for me, healing really significant trauma wounds that I'm not going to be specific on because this isn't my therapy, but it set me up for success. But the pain of going through it, I felt like was going to kill me. So if anyone who's listening to this or watching it right now feels, if you're either afraid to get therapy or you're in the midst of it and you feel like it's not helpful, hear what I'm saying, because I want to share my experience, strength, and hope in that it can get better. It will get better. It does get better. And unfortunately, there's no other way out than through. I think it's a very human experience to say, I don't want to deal with this pain. Especially for me, it had been years and years and years of unresolved trauma and pain. And, it's human nature to say, I don't want to do this. But the only way out is through. And I was afraid that would kill me, but I promise you it won't. And you'll get through it. The one thing that I really want to share is that I never considered that some of my best days were ahead of me. I literally never considered that. When I was like in the peak of my depression and I had these like dark shaded glasses on and it was just like, ugh. I never ever considered that my best days, some of them are ahead of me. And look, here we are talking to each other, listening to each other. Without healing and moving forward, I wouldn't be doing this. And, so for me, it is about paying it forward, but it's also just about giving people listening to this hope that I promise it, just keep hustling, keep working. It gets better. And some of your best days are ahead of you. So please don't forget that. Now on to the fun stuff. Meeting the cast of Friends in 1999 during the peak of their popularity was the wildest experience of my entire life. So first I'll start with, I had a wonderful, and I forget his name, I had a handler, that's what they called them, like a Make-A-Wish handler who was, in LA, and he kind of, was taking us to restaurants and, to the sound studios, to Warner Brothers and things like that. So I got to see, the sound studios for Friends, ER, and West Wing. Personally, I loved all those shows, and a lot of those actors have gone on to do really amazing things as well. And no, I didn't get to meet George Clooney. By the time that I'm at the cast of ER, I did meet Noah Wyle, and I do have a picture with him. I'm going to show people who are watching the video right now. I'm going to show you, but I'm also going to post this on my Instagram. So this is a picture of me with Noah Wyle, a little baby Melissa, who basically had like no hair because my hair had just grown back from chemotherapy. So I have like peach fuzz. But fortunately, I'm cute and I pulled it off. So hooray for me. Hooray for confidence. So no, I didn't get to meet George Clooney, but I did meet Noah Wyle and some other really cool people. Initially, I was only supposed to be at the not the taping of Friends. They were doing their, whatever the professional term is for it, the run through, the practice. I'm sorry, I'm not an LA person. I don't know. They were doing their run through, and I was watching that. And David Schwimmer and Matthew Perry, who played Chandler and Ross, respectively, they both truly advocated for me. And they said, at the time, Marta Kaufman, the producer, she's since died also from cancer, unfortunately, that they kind of said to her, they're like, look at this girl. She's so cute. We feel like she could be, I mean, I don't think they said cute. Like, this is not a Me Too moment. They advocated for me, and they said, we think she should be an extra and should attend a taping. So really, Matt and I keep like blanking on their real names because it's a lot to keep track of in my head. So Matthew Perry and David Schwimmer seriously got me to be an extra on an episode of Friends. Unfortunately, so it's the episode where Monica and Chandler are talking about moving in together, and they talk about merging their, Chandler makes a joke about merge, and Joey has this young lady who's going to be his roommate. That's the episode. I can definitely share the exact episode number, but here's the thing. You can't really see me. You kind of see my elbow. So I'd be shouting it from the rooftops and telling everyone to watch if you could see me, but you really can't. So, who cares? But I was there. I know I did it, and it was flippin' amazing. Being an extra for me was wild because as a regular person, I know nothing about how Hollywood works. But, when you're sitting in Central Park, you're supposed to act like you're talking, but for sound purposes, you need to not be talking. So essentially you're just sitting next to some random person, pretending to have a conversation, pretending to drink your coffee, but you had to be careful about putting it down because of the sound, the powerful microphones. You couldn't shake your sugar. So they wanted you to act and be a part of the background, but very, very quietly. So that was super interesting. Being an extra in a scene at Central Park, like, hello, life made. That was amazing. And, what was so amazing is that after the scene, David Schwimmer stands up and gives me a thumbs up and comes over and says, "You did amazing," and gives me a hug. What? So sweet. So to this day, if anyone who is listening to this knows David Schwimmer or Matthew Perry or can have them hear this, please forward this along, because truly I've just always wanted to thank them. I feel that when there are people who go out of their way to do little things for you, in this case, it wasn't little, but it just made all the difference in the world. And they were just good humans. Like, they didn't have to do any of that. And I just am so grateful and thankful. So, I've always just wanted to pay it forward, but they're such big celebrities that it's impossible to get any messages to them. So I just had, and then so after that, I met with the entire cast in Monica's living room. What? Sitting on the couches in Monica's living room, meeting with the entire cast. And there were some great moments, and then there were some real disappointments. So I'll share all that with you. So as I mentioned, Matthew Perry and David Schwimmer were just magical humans. Matt LeBlanc at the time, and this is how long ago this was, he made some funny comment about how I had such a beautiful name, which Melissa, it's like one of the most basic B names on the planet. Every kid in the 80s was named Melissa. There were like 8 Melissas on my block. Anywho, I digress. He said it was such a beautiful name because at the time he was dating, I believe her name is Melissa McBride. So they eventually went on to get married and divorced. And they are now divorced. But I thought that was very interesting. So Matt LeBlanc kind of brought it back to himself, didn't have a lot to say. Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox were just like super sweet, down to earth, very kind, very soft spoken. Specifically, Jennifer Aniston. She was just, you could just tell she has like an amazing energy about her, and she's just like really sweet and lovely. And so was Courtney. I will tell you, the person I was most let down by was Lisa Kudrow. On the show, Phoebe at the time was my favorite. I was a weird little teenager going through a lot of stuff. And so I really loved her and related with her character. And she barely talked to me. She made some joke about, she thought, like, we were all sitting in Monica's apartment together. And she said, "Oh, I thought we had a meeting." And I was like, "Well, I guess I am the meeting." And she just kind of laughed and really didn't say much else. So, and listen, I'm not saying she's a terrible person. I'm just saying from my 17-year-old perspective, She wasn't very kind. She wasn't very friendly. She certainly, I walked away feeling really disappointed, which, guess that's why they say don't meet your heroes. Not that she was a hero of mine or that anyone on TV is a hero per se. But, it was just one of those things where I was like, I definitely expected a little bit different and I was let down. So, c'est la vie. So after we had that little get together, this was the time where Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt were dating, but it was kind of secretive. And one of the PAs on the show kind of like said, "Psst, come here." They brought me out to one of the stage studios. The door was like leading to the parking lot. And they said, "Brad's here. You can't talk to him, but you can look at them." And so they opened the door and I got to see Brad and Jen, pre-marriage, pre-divorce, all of that. I got to see them together. And that was just like a very wild experience. And to be fair, if Brad Pitt knew I was there, perhaps he would have been okay with meeting me, but I certainly wasn't going to push it or be entitled or whatever. I was just so grateful to experience whatever I could that day. So that was very, very cool. Trying to think of what else. So behind me, again, for those of you watching the video, I have like a friends collage behind me that I made. They didn't allow me to take a picture with the cast, which, kind of was sad and frustrating. Like, how cool would that have been if I could have had a picture with the cast? But it was just like, it was like a legal issue or something. They just like didn't do that. But they all had this funny cast picture where they're like on a construction site. And I'm going to post all of this on my social media, so don't worry for those who are just listening. But so they did autograph that, and I have that picture. And one of the PAs, he wrote me this lovely letter, about going to college and wishing me the best. Because let's not forget, I didn't think I was going to college. I was senior year. I was like, well, I can't apply to college because I don't know if I'm going to survive this. So I had to like quickly hurry up and like go, apply to colleges. And I had to go to one locally because I still had to be followed by doctors and get scanned like every 5 seconds and all of that good stuff. But they were just, overall the experience was just so special and so fun and so amazing. We got to eat at the Beverly Hills Hotel. We got to, just do a lot of fun things. My memory since then has been, it's really mushy because now I'm 42 and after chemotherapy and immunotherapy, and certainly after COVID, my brain is just fundamentally different. So if I remember something, that means it's real special or real not special. Also, I do want to say really quick, West Wing, I got to meet Martin Sheen and Dule Hill, who, Dule Hill is amazing. I'm a huge fan of Psych, with him and James Roday and some other really amazing people. So getting to meet him and Martin Sheen, I'm sorry, I definitely didn't meet Charlie Sheen. Martin Sheen was so kind. He hugged me and he said, if you ever need a place to stay in LA, please let me know. And he was dead serious. Like, but in a nice way. Like, again, this is not like a Me Too thing. He was not strange or being, creepy or whatever. He was just like such a nice person. And I know that he forgot me the day after I met him, but still, to make someone feel really special when you're like a superstar, I think that's a really cool quality and characteristic. And, he just seems like a lovely human being. So the thing that before I kind of end the podcast, I just want to, again, use this opportunity to encourage everyone listening to this to be an advocate for themselves. In all seriousness, unfortunately, cancer is so prevalent. And anyone who's listening to this that's dealing with it, or, whether it's themselves or a family member, if you're a caretaker, I just send love to you all because it's just, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, it's just so hard and just so traumatizing. And I think that, the quick story that I'll tell is that going back to we know our bodies. So my second cancer, before it was diagnosed, my lymph nodes had started to swell, and that's what can happen with leukemias and lymphomas. Your lymph nodes can get big, and not in response to any normal thing. So that was the first sign that I had that something wasn't right. And I, at the time, this is irony here, I had an oncologist gynecologist. So for people who have cervical cancers, ovarian cancers, cancers of the reproductive system, you must see an oncologist who specializes in gynecology. That's just how it goes. And I was seeing him for a checkup for my, ovarian cancer, which, I was continually monitored and things like that. Because so at that time, to be clear, I had a partial hysterectomy. I had my ovaries and fallopian tubes removed, but they kept my uterus and my cervix in the event I wanted to try to have children one day. Eventually, I had the other stuff removed as well last year because that was causing a whole other problem. So, but the point is I went to my follow-up appointment with my oncologist gynecologist, and I expressed concern to him about this lymph node, and he said to me, and I quote, wait, hold on. Now I have to remember. He said, "You're being a hypochondriac. Go out and enjoy your life." That's really what he said. And fortunately, I fired him. I walked out. I said, "I will never come back here. Don't ever speak to me like that again." I found another doctor who did a biopsy, and sure enough, it was CLL. So you would think after having one cancer, people would take you really seriously, but unfortunately, the medical system is just really broken. There are some beautiful healing people, empathetic witnesses who are doctors, nurses, PAs, healthcare practitioners. There are some amazing people, but there are also some truly awful people. So you would think that I would get a lot of, attention and focus because of my history. No, I was still ignored. And again, I knew my body. So the message here is that if you feel like you're seeing a practitioner, whether it's a doctor, nurse, practitioner, whoever that you feel like is not hearing you, fire them and move forward. We can do that. You can do that. I have told doctors to F off to their face because you're not going to talk to me crazy. Ain't going to happen. So I encourage you, whether you need to tend to your mental, physical, emotional, whatever health you need to attend to, please attend to it. This is your sign to schedule whatever it is you've been putting off, whether it's a doctor's appointment, a therapist appointment, whether it's a massage or a vacation, whatever you need to do for self-care. This is your sign from Oz. Do it. Book it. Do it. Not knowing and not getting treatment, but just being in pain is not a good way to live. Like, I think sometimes as humans, we just deal with so much crap, and it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. Healing is possible. Growth, recovery, it's all possible. And I promise you can all get there. So this is, just a little bit about me, a little bit of a PSA, a little bit of advocacy for myself and for everyone listening. And I hope that you all found this interesting and not horribly boring. But thank you so much for listening, for being empathetic witnesses to my story, for, hearing the things that I've been through. And, every once in a while, I'm happy to do an episode like this where I share a little bit more about me, although this won't be the norm. Because let's face it, there's too much other super juicy stuff to talk about. So what I'm going to do is for now say thank you for listening. And the next episode, is going to cover some of I'm going on vacation. I'm going back to where I grew up and meeting with some of my childhood friends and having a family reunion. So I'll share a little bit about that when I get back. And for now, I'm going to get into all that legal stuff. So here is the disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Yourbishtherapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Grey Heart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with your Bish therapist via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback. Whew, that's a big one. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing y'all later. Take care.